Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of 4 lectures for the GL4U or GeneLab for Colleges and Universities Introduction Module set. My name is Amanda Saravia Butler, and I am a contractor at NASA Ames, currently working as the NASA GeneLab Science Lead. And in this first lecture, we're going to start with an introduction to NASA, the Science Mission Directorate, and space biology. I'd actually like to start here with my acknowledgements. I work with an extraordinary group of people at the NASA Open Science Data Repositories, of which GeneLab is a part of. We'll talk more about in this lecture series. And 3 of the projects in NASA's OSDR is GeneLab ALSDA and NBIS. OSDR's project scientist is currently Dr. Sylvan Costas, and we get our support from the NASA Space Biology Program, the NASA Science Mission Directorate, NASA Human Research Program, and NASA Biological and Physical Sciences Division, which I'll talk more about in this lecture. So a big thank you to everyone on all of the teams here who I get to work with every day. Really a joy to work with them. So starting first with an introduction to the NASA Aeronautics and Space Administration, known as NASA. So before NASA, there was actually the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that first. So we first went into flight back in 1903 when the Wright brothers successfully took flight. Shortly after that, NACA, or the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, was established. And then we had our first NACA center, Langley, in 1917, followed a couple of decades later by the Ames Research Center, which is where I work. And then the Glenn Center was established in 1942, followed by the Dryden or Armstrong Center. And then we actually achieved our first supersonic flight, so that's flight faster than the speed of sound, in 1947. And then in the early 1950s, really at the start of the Cold War, NACA begins to look into the possibility of manned spaceflight. And that brings us to the late 1950s, where we had a plan to we've established a plan to orbit a scientific satellite. And that actually gets us started to just before when NASA was established. So in 1957 is when the Soviets beat the US to launch the first space satellite, Sputnik 1. And then shortly after that, in 1958, US launches its first satellite. And then in 1958, that same year, is when the National Aeronautics Space Administration is established and it absorbs itself into NACA. And then in the early 1960s, we have Mercury single astronaut program that sought to ask the question, is it possible for humans to survive in space? That was followed shortly by Project Gemini, in which 2 astronauts practice various space operations. And then, of course, we're all very familiar with the Apollo project back in the late 1960s and early 70s, where we successfully landed a human on the moon and then continued to have several missions to the moon over the course of those few years. And then in 1981, we had the very first space shuttle mission. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with the space shuttle, it was a reusable spacecraft developed by NASA that carried astronauts and cargo to space. It was used, as we'll see in this timeline, for about 3 decades, from 1981 to 2011, for various missions, including deploying satellites, conducting scientific research, and as we'll get into, assembling the International Space Station. And then in 1984 was actually when Congress authorized NASA to begin to build the International Space Station. I don't have it on here, but in 2001 is when the space station was complete. And then in 2011 was when we had the last space shuttle mission, STS-135. And then although that was our last space shuttle mission, we still continue to send astronauts to the International Space Station. We actually did that through our collaboration with Russia. So just a quick overview of NASA's vision here, which is to reach for new heights and reveal the unknown for the benefit of humankind. NASA's mission is to drive advances in science, technology, aeronautics, and space exploration to enhance knowledge, education, innovation, economic vitality, and stewardship of Earth. And this is just showing some of the many NASA advances here. We have an extraordinary feat of engineering, the crawler here at Kennedy Space Center, which is actually used to move large rockets to the launch pad. Down here, we have astronaut Christina Koch. It looks like she's working on something inside of the veggie platform to grow plants in space. We'll talk more about that a little later on. Here's just a snapshot of a cell science bioculture system, which is used to grow cells in space. A little bit more about that as well. And then down here in the lower right is the future of NASA currently building the Gateway, which is going to allow us to send humans back to the moon. So how does NASA achieve its mission? Well, NASA headquarters provides overall guidance and direction to the agency. NASA centers and facilities are where the day-to-day NASA work is performed in laboratories, airfields, wind tunnels, and other structures. And NASA conducts its work through 6 main organizations referred to as NASA's mission directorates. Those mission directorates are the Space Operations Mission Directorate, which maintains a continuous human presence in space for the benefit of people on Earth. We have the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, which defines and manages systems development for programs critical to NASA's Artemis program and planning for NASA's Moon to Mars exploration approach. We also have the Space Technology Mission Directorate, and this technology drives exploration and space economy, and NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate aims to transform future missions while ensuring American leadership in aerospace. We have the Science Mission Directorate, which is my favorite mission directorate. It's the directorate I worked under, or I do work under, and the NASA Science Mission Directorate seeks to discover the secrets of the universe, search for life elsewhere, and protect and improve life on Earth and in space. And we have the Mission Support Directorate, which enables NASA mission success. They provide the tools, people, and capabilities to ensure NASA leadership in aerospace science and exploration. And last but certainly not least is the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate. And it's important to note that today every U.S. commercial aircraft and air traffic control facility incorporates NASA-developed technology. Aeronautics Research Director is really the heart of NASA. I'm constantly reminded by people who work in the Aeronautics Mission Directorate that aeronautics comes before space in NASA. So this is just a high-level org chart showing here our top-level administrators at NASA, along with the various offices that sit just below that. Down here, we see those 6 mission directorates we just talked about. And then here we see represented are the different NASA centers. And I should point out that different projects within the different directorates, multiple ones of those can be carried out at any one center. Currently, NASA is led by Administrator Senator Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson was sworn in as the 14th NASA Administrator on May 13th, 2021. And not only is he a former senator from Florida, he also worked as a payload specialist on the Columbia Space Shuttle mission 61C back in the mid-1980s. And then NASA's Deputy Administrator is former astronaut Pamela Mallory, who is one of only 2 women to ever command the space shuttle. So I have links out to their bios here for you guys to go and learn more about NASA's leadership. This is just a map showing the different NASA centers and facilities. You can see that we're spread out all over the US here. And if you guys want to learn more about the different NASA centers and facilities, you can find information on each and every one of these if you visit nasa.gov/centers and facilities. I should mention all of these slides should have a link somewhere on them for you guys to go and learn more information. So next year, I'm often asked when I started working at NASA is, why do we spend so much money on space when we have all these issues here on Earth? Well, I first want to let you guys know that we actually don't spend that much money on space. So in fiscal year 2024, we're actually only projected to spend 0.086% of the total GDP on the NASA budget. So it's really not as much as you may think. And we get a lot out of the stuff and research that's done at NASA that benefits us right here on Earth. Here I'm just showing some examples of some spin-offs from the work that we've been doing over the past several decades to get to Mars. And so several advances in the ability to generate wind power, the technology in guiding automatic cars that we use here on Earth, even materials that we developed for space mission have been utilized in different types of surgeries here on Earth. Our ability to detect methane leaks and other gases, also a lot of that technology developed at NASA. Even the technology to fuel the journey home from Mars was found another use on Earth to capture carbon dioxide emitted by fermenting hops and be able to allow us to have bubbly beverages here on Earth. In addition to that, so much we've been able to accomplish in the fight against climate change. So NASA is currently working on an all-electric flight, which would greatly reduce any emissions for spaceflight here on Earth. Also being able to ensure that any of our machinery, when it's not in use, is utilizing as little energy as possible. So energy conservation technologies is something that is spearheaded here at NASA. Of course, I'm sure that we've all, like myself, many of you guys have also conducted Google Earth searches, taking a look at the Earth. A lot of this is from different satellite images that were a result from NASA satellites. Advances in solar energy technology also spearheaded by NASA here. In fact, the International Space Station and a lot of our missions into space are powered by solar panels. Furthermore, a lot of what we're trying to do for different spaceflight missions is to simulate what's going to happen before it does by developing things known as digital twins. That is also being utilized here on Earth to try to predict different events and simulate different events before they happen. And then similar to what I mentioned previously, the technology to be able to detect gas leaks, also a lot of technology developed as a result of NASA missions and research. So what's in store for NASA in the future? Well, one piece of technology I touched on in a previous slide is quiet supersonic technology. And the preliminary design here is in the initial stages at NASA. And the goal is to be able to fly with reduced fuel use, emissions, and noise, and to actually make supersonic flight over land possible. So to be able to fly a lot faster with a lot less environmental impact. There's a deep space optical communications, or DSOC package, that was aboard NASA's Psyche mission. Will use a light or laser communications to transmit more data to Earth in a given amount of time, so making communication to space more efficient. There is the Space Launch System, and this is going to be one of the most powerful rockets ever created. The SLS will launch crews of up to 4 astronauts in the agency's Orion spacecraft on its missions to explore multiple deep space destinations, including the moon, and ultimately Mars. We have the James Webb Space Telescope, which is a NASA-led project done in collaboration with both the European and Canadian space agencies. And that's going to be the world's next premier space science observatory. It's going to allow us to look deeper and deeper into our solar system and beyond. We have Orion here, and the Orion spacecraft is the spacecraft that is actually going to house the astronauts that we send on the Space Launch System into both the moon first and then ultimately to Mars. And then we have one of my favorite missions, the Parker Solar Probe, which was launched a few years ago. It is the first ever NASA mission to be named after a living scientist. And the goal of this mission is to travel directly into the sun's atmosphere. The plan is to get about 4 million miles from our star's surface, which is the closest we have ever come to the sun. And it is currently in orbit between Mercury and the sun, making closer and closer passes to the sun every time it goes through. Definitely encourage you guys to check that out. We are uncovering more than we've ever known about the star that powers life here on Earth because of that mission. So this is only a few of the different missions and technologies that's currently on deck at NASA. I grabbed this from the nasa.gov special 60 and counting future site. So definitely encourage you guys to check that out to learn more. So I talked about several of the 6 mission directorates here at NASA. And so I'm going to focus now on the Science Mission Directorate, which is the directorate I work under. And then we're going to dive deeper within that directorate. And so first, NASA SMD, or Science Mission Directorate by the numbers, just showing the various missions, Earth observations, technological developments, research, and then flights including small satellites and CubeSats, sounding rockets, and balloon that has all been conducted in the name of science. And this actual site is actually a couple years old already. So all these numbers have increased from what you see here. So a lot of support for different sciences from the Science Mission Directorate at NASA. This is just going over some of the different divisions within the Science Mission Directorate that carries out different science goals. So first here, you're looking at the Earth Science Division, which is the study of planet Earth. The Heliophysics Division, which is the study of the sun and its effects on the solar system. The Astrophysics Division, this is the study of the origin, structure, evolution, and destiny of the universe. And then we have the Planetary Sciences Division, which is the study of the origin and history of our very own solar system. We have the Biological and Physical Sciences Division, which is my favorite division, because it's where I currently work. And the BPS mission is to lead the world in fundamental space-based research, pioneer transformational discoveries, and enable sustained human space exploration and improve life on Earth and in space. We also have a couple of important programs I'm going to highlight here, the Lunar Discovery and Exploration program, with the goal of studying various science aspects as we travel back to the moon. This year, just looking at an awesome image from NASA's Lunar Resonance Orbiter. And then lastly, here's the astrobiology program, which studies the origin, evolution, and distribution of life in the universe. Just highlighting here one of their recent releases, issue 9 of their graphic novel that celebrated 50 years of exobiology and astrobiology at NASA. And this special issue walks through how to become an astrobiologist. So pretty interesting. I definitely encourage you guys to take a look, especially if that's something you're considering in your future careers. So now we're going to dive deeper into the Biological and Physical Sciences division here. This is just a snapshot showing the various locations of which the BPS division conducts its different missions and research. And the overall mission of the Biological and Physical Sciences Division is to pioneer scientific discovery in and beyond low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit is where the International Space Station resides, and to drive advances in science, technology, and space exploration to enhance knowledge, education, innovation, and economic vitality. Also to enable human spaceflight exploration, to expand the frontiers of knowledge, capability, and opportunity in space. So we've actually been doing life sciences research at NASA for a very long time now, actually over 60 decades now, which is something that when I first joined NASA, I actually didn't know about. I always associate NASA with engineering and astrology and not really biology, but it turns out that actually NASA does quite a bit of life sciences research, and this is just a snapshot of a timeline showing that we've been doing life sciences research since the biosatellites back in the 1960s. did a lot of ground-based studies trying to understand what the impact of a lack of gravity would be on living systems, including bed rest studies where humans volunteer to just lay down on a bed, so to minimize loading of gravity on their muscles, as well as some rodent models called the high limb unloading model that suspends the animals rodents by their tail, so their hind limbs are not touching the ground, so not weight bearing. And that actually allowed us to realize that we have to consider musculoskeletal changes that would take place with a lack of gravity. And then, of course, the science technology continued as we started conducting space missions, including the first vertebrate or frog egg fertilization and development in space, all the way through biocomputing and 3D imaging, a lot of science conducted on the space shuttle, including looking at microtubule virulence, plant tropism, different effects on the immune system. We've conducted so many scientific missions on the International Space Station, looking more at the impacts of the space environment on living systems. Also some synthetic biology, so mitigation strategies to try to combat those effects. GeneLab, the project that I work on that we'll be talking a lot about throughout this module set, and any of the omics specific ones, was started in 2014. And then now we're looking more and more into the future of different types of conducting beyond low Earth orbit or beyond where the International Space Station orbits the Earth. What have we learned from all of this life sciences research that we've done? Well, we've learned that exposure to spaceflight changes our physiological systems. And it changes pretty much every single one that we've looked into. So from the musculoskeletal system, to the cardiovascular system, the lymphatic system, the central nervous system, the reproductive system, and the digestive system. We've noticed an impacts on all of these systems as a result of exposure to the space environment. And humans and animals aren't the only living things affected. Plants, we have also seen, are affected by the space environment too. Here you're looking at a plant model organism, Arabidopsis, and you see here ground control on the left growing here on Earth, and then how the root growth of this organism is disrupted in spaceflight here on the right. And this is looking at the macro scale, as well as down here at the micro scale, seeing disruption of cellular organization due to the space environment. And so that's why the space biology program was created within the biological and physical sciences to specifically look at the impact of the space environment on these different systems. So looking specifically at the effects on animal biology, cell and molecular biology, microbiology, plant biology, as well as developmental, reproductive, and evolutionary biology. All of these aspects are studied within the space biology program. Because doing science, especially life sciences, is very challenging in the context of spaceflight, we have actually at NASA developed hardware to be able to grow and perform research on these different organism types. So I'm just going to show you a little snapshot of some of the hardware that's been developed here. So first, looking at the spaceflight hardware to conduct cell research. So this is the BioCell. We're seeing a single cell here on the left. On the right is what a 6-well BioCell looks like. And then here in the middle is how these cells are stacked within the container that's going to be flown in space. And this system is used to be able to grow mammalian cells or tissues. It can also grow small organisms, as well as microbes such as yeast, bacteria, fungi, and algae. We conduct studies such as looking at biofilm formation on these different systems, as well as the impact of cellular growth and the cellular machinery, the effects of that in the spaceflight environment. We also have here is the fluid processing apparatus, or FPA. And this is another apparatus. It's a fully enclosed test tube, allowing for controlled and sequential mixing of 2 to 4 liquids in microgravity, while ensuring that these liquids are fully contained. So 3 different types of Liquids that can be included in here are things like inoculant volume, which would be a small volume to stabilize a dormant microbe before you want to initiate an experiment, and then a medium volume that could be introduced that is growth medium to allow that microbe to be able to grow in space. And then a fixative volume that will provide some sort of fixative solution to be able to preserve the state of those, in this example, microorganisms in spaceflight, so that we then can return it to Earth and be able to perform some additional studies and analyses. In addition to microbes and microorganisms, we can also grow mammalian cells and tissues in the system, perform protein crystal growth to see the effects of protein crystallization in space, as well as other biomaterials, and also small plants, and be able to study seed germination. I showed you a picture of this earlier. This is the bioculture system. It is another microfluidic system, fully enclosed, that we can perform cell culture experiments in spaceflight. And then lastly here, I have the Wet Lab 2, which is currently in development, being designed to automate reverse transcriptase quantitative PCR. And so this device is actually used to study gene expression. So how genes are, or which genes are either turned on or turned off in the context of the space environment, be able to do it in real time, fully automated, which is going to have a huge advantage when we send these science missions to the moon and Mars, especially for unmanned flight missions where we'll need everything to be done automatically. It's really going to allow us to do a lot of really cool science without needing any human intervention. What we have here is some other type of spaceflight hardware known as the biological research in canisters, or BRIC hardware, and this is used to study microbiology as well as the development of small organisms in space. For those of you guys in the sciences, that structure probably is really familiar. It's essentially a petri dish that's able to be grown in an enclosed container and sent to space. And this is just looking at how it is set up and the container that it's used to be able to launch into space, and then what it looks like seeing some living systems growing within those petri dishes, and some images that can be taken actually in spaceflight. Another piece of equipment here is a multi-use variable gravity platform, or MVP platform. This is used to study the effects of spaceflight on small animals such as fruit flies or worms. And the thing that's really cool about this is we're just looking at one chamber or one notch in the centrifuge here. Each one of these contains 4. And so you see the chamber here, which contains a video camera. And this is where, let's say you have a fruit fly experiment, you are able to record and monitor how those fruit flies behave, how their ability to fly is affected by the spaceflight environment. We then have these chambers here that will allow these animals to be able to lay eggs, reproduce inside this chamber, which can then be turned prior to hatching, such that all of the offspring are then released into a subsequent or adjacent chamber, allowing us to perform multi-generational studies in space, which is just a really cool thing to be able to do. Is what does it look like for an organism to be fully developed in the spaceflight environment? Another really cool aspect of the MVP platform is because it's sitting on a centrifuge, we can tease out some of the confounding variables that we have to deal with in space. So by putting it on our centrifuge, we can add artificial gravity while it's in the spaceflight environment. So that way we can tease out what the effects are specifically as it relates to anti-gravity fields versus other aspects of spaceflight, such as radiation exposure, increased CO2 levels, et cetera. We also have specialized equipment to be able to grow plants in space. What you're looking at here is the advanced plant habitat. This is some dwarf wheat growing within that habitat. We also see here on the right the veggie platform, which I think I introduced a little bit earlier. So we see 2 astronauts here on the top and the bottom performing some research, or maybe just eating some freshly grown plants here that was grown on the International Space Station. And lastly, here I'm going to show some spaceflight hardware for us to do research on rodents in space. You'll see what it looks like with the rodents inside in spaceflight on the right from the Rodent Research 1 mission. But these animals are housed within rodent research habitats. So you see a picture of in the top left corner here. You can get a closer view inside that habitat here. They have to drink out of these specialized contained pieces of equipment known as elixids. So the mice will actually have to touch a little lever here to be able to release the water. We also, of course, cannot feed these mice food pellets as we would doing research here on the ground. So we have special food bars made that are actually glued onto these platforms within their cage with FDA-approved adhesive. So that way we can make sure that we don't have pellets flying all over the space station. In order to access the animals, the astronauts will latch on this animal access unit, which connects directly to the habitat. And you'll see that this is fully confined with some holes for the astronaut or crew members to put their hands in there. And then we have these mouse transfer boxes for which the animals will be placed inside those mouse transfer boxes within this animal access unit to be able to perform various aspects of research for that particular mission, whether it either be weighing the animals, treating the animals, or performing dissections of those animals on the space station. So where you might ask are all of these, what we call payloads, where we host our living, we host the equipment to be able to grow living organisms in space. It is on these express rats. That stands for expedite the processing of experiments to the space station. And so these express rats can hold a variety of different types of experiments, including biological experiments, and they are connected to different electronics that allow us to power those habitats, so that way we can do things like record videos, give the animals lights, etc. Here on the left, what you're seeing is where the scientific research is conducted in space. So on the top here is a microgravity science glove box, and on the bottom is just a larger version of that, the life sciences glove box. And this is where any dissections, sample collections are performed in space. Of course, notice that everything has to be strapped down in the space station. If not, it would be floating all over. So really take use of these different bungee type cords as well as Velcro on the space station to make sure that research can be conducted in space. So one thing that brings all of the data generated from all of these amazing programs and missions conducted by the Space Biology Program is NASA's Open Sciences projects here. And so here we're just looking at the different projects that make up NASA Open Science. We're going to talk a lot more about NASA's Open Science projects, as well as the Open Science Data Repository and GeneLab in Lecture 2 of the GL4U Introduction lecture. So this brings me to the end of the very first lecture of the GL4U Introduction module set. I hope you enjoyed this overview of NASA, the Science Mission Directorate, and the Space Biology programs. And just to end again, acknowledging all the wonderful people that I get to work with at NASA on the Open Sciences project, as well as our support. And this is the end of lecture 1 of the 4 lectures that make up the GL4U Introduction module set. I will see you at lecture number 2. Thanks, everyone.